Hello, this is Jack Tutor of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak to experimental musicians and sound artists about 3 records that are important to them. My guest this time is Lasse Marhaug, a Norwegian musician working within the experimental and noise sector. Extremely prolific, very important, I guess, to the noise and experimental scene in the fact that he's incredibly well connected, has been involved in so many different projects and collaborations. He's definitely been involved in way over 300 individual releases, whether that's as a collaborator, a producer, or an artist. And it seems that I can't do an interview with another musician these days without them mentioning some kind of involvement with Lasse, or a story where Lasse has been really helpful in terms of his connections or his creative input. He, in fact, contributed to a compilation I put out called Brink. He did 2 one-minute tracks, one of which he said could blow people's speakers, and recommended that I put a warning just in case people complain that their hi-fi just erupted. And he's masterful, really, in his control of frequencies and the intensity of the sound that he amasses when he creates his compositions. So it was a real pleasure to speak to him. You can check out more information on Lasse, including info on a new upload that he's just done of a load of tape releases from the 90s. There's a whole host of material running from 1990 through to 1999 that's just gone up on his Bandcamp. So I'll put all the links in the show notes and over at attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Lasse talking about his 3 important albums. Hello, Lasse. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Thank you, Jack.
So, you were over in my part of the world, vaguely, in the UK at least, in London, only a couple of weeks back. Whereabouts were you doing there?
Yeah, it's always nice to visit civilizations from time to time. Because I live in the far north of Norway, in the city of Bodø, which is about 5 hours drive above the Arctic Circle. So it's always nice to get out and feel civilization and see what's going on. But I was there just for one day. I did a concert at Café Otto with my friend Kim Myhr, and we put out an album earlier this year, and we sort of started a collaboration. And so I was there in less than 24 hours, and I wish I stayed longer.
Wow. You're the second guest I've had in a row who's made a very quick visit to somewhere abroad. I imagine it must be... Look, the other person was Lawrence English, who pinged across to Europe for 2 days. But it must be quite a headspin to do that, because obviously playing a show requires a lot of investment, and travel as well can be, I don't know, fatiguing for me anyway. I mean, how do you handle those sort of flash visits like that?
I used to be really good at it. I now have a daughter who is 3 years old, and I travel far less, and I don't tour anymore, basically, and I travel far less. But before she was born, I would travel all the time. I was constantly traveling, and it wouldn't really. It was very easy for me. You get more relaxed in airports and all these things. But I see now that when I travel less, it becomes more of an effort. So I guess it's a muscle that you you flex. But now I'm so old and rusty.
And how was the show itself? I mean, Oto is a venue that I hold dear. It's been pretty instrumental in my acquaintance with live experimental music as someone over here relatively close to London. How did you find the show?
I love Oto, same as you. I think it's an important venue. It's really a place that, how do you say, it's much needed. And I remember the time before Oto, and London was kind of dead, actually. I remember playing more gigs in places like Newcastle and Leeds than I would in London. So it's just now it feels like Otto has been in London forever, but you remember a time when it wasn't there, and it's definitely filled a huge gap that was very, very much welcome when Otto came.
Yeah. And it's an interesting layout for a venue, I think, and I think it works in its advantage sometimes and against it at others, in that almost the way the seating and tables are arranged, there's a very slight social aspect to the way that place is set up. But then I think that can produce quite a relaxed atmosphere. There's quite a loose boundary between where the audience and the performers are.
Well, I like that. For me, that's a great thing, because I don't like playing on the stage.
Right.
I'd rather not play on the stage. I would rather sit on the floor next to people to play. And one thing is, I think with electronic music, it's really boring to begin with, because there's not a lot of visual things going on. And once you put yourself higher than the audience, they don't see anything what's going on. So I would always get these questions like, "What are you doing? What are these instruments?" And people are curious. So I found if I sat in the audience next to people, they could see what I'm doing, and then they could sooner realize that it's not really important what I'm doing. It's just a bunch of crap on the table, and how it sounds is what I want them to focus on. So if I sat next to them, close to them, they could see that, and then they could just relax and hopefully focus on the music. The other thing is that when I'm sitting on the floor, I could have the PA behind me, so I could hear the same as the audience are hearing. Because when you're on the stage and you have monitoring, you're basically relying on a simulated version of what you hope is going out to the people in the venue, and you have to trust the sound engineer. And I've had my fights with sound engineers over the years, although it's become much nicer. And when you come to a place like Otto, they really know this stuff, so that's not a problem. But yeah, I enjoy being on the floor. I enjoy demystifying this thing with the guy with the crap on the table. It's like, because it's sort of alchemy. This music, it's you're taking something crappy and you hopefully making something interesting out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the sound engineer feuds, I've been witness to a few of those, especially when the music in question is of a noisy nature. I've had sound engineers go, "Look, if he's gonna sit that close to that speaker with all that sheet metal, it's gonna feed back. Is he aware of that?" But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about the monitoring thing. I personally, I really struggle with it, because I think the unity, surely, between yourself and your listenership and being able to, I guess, try and elicit some kind of empathy and engage in that yourself, depends very much so on what you're both hearing and sharing that experience. I mean, particularly with your stuff, Lasse, I mean, your use of frequencies feels so exact and often very visceral, and knowing whether it's going to have that visceral quality is surely dependent on being able to feel it in your bones in the same manner as the people in attendance will do.
That's true, and despite what I guess a number of people believe, I'm not really out to hurt people or to make something painful. But I am expressing a very intense type of music, but it's also very delicate. So I don't want to subject people to something that's above, across a certain level of what you can endure. And if I'm hearing the same as they are, and I'm subjecting myself to the same thing as them, I could be more precise in the frequency range, and I've found that I could take people from a specific point of the concert starts. There's nothing, but I could take them to extremes that they probably didn't think that they would be willing to go to. But I'm sitting there myself, and I can work it very carefully, and this has become, I guess, what I do quite a lot when I play. It's this very, very slow, meticulous build-up and reaching this sort of climax, I guess.
It's been interesting for me to reflect on what you're doing now and how that contrasts to maybe earlier periods of your life as a creator of sound, particularly given that you've just uploaded a whole bunch of stuff to Bandcamp. I know it's a collection of tapes that were digitized back 10 years ago now.
10 years ago, yeah, I did a box set of my cassette works of the 1990s when I was a teenager starting up.
And it sounded like the process of initially pulling that together back in 2007 may have been quite interesting in terms of reflecting on the type of sounds that you were generating then. I mean, how's it been to reflect, I guess, on these releases another 10 years on? I mean, have the thoughts that you've had over that material changed at all in the process of it coming back to the top of your consciousness again?
I listen to this old material, and I hear the young Lasse Marhaug. I hear the kid trying to find his way in this music that he's fascinated by. I'm testing out these things. I'm exploring, and I'm young, and I have too much energy, and so probably quite naive in some sense. But there is this sense of exploration. But I also hear that I haven't really developed that much in terms of ideas and what I like, and the sound world that I have. I'm basically doing the same thing. And there is this saying that any artist is basically just redoing the same 3-4 ideas over and over again. And that may be cynical to say, but there's some truth to that also. And I think I've become more refined over the years. I've become more self-aware. I know what I'm doing a lot more, and I've become technically much more sophisticated than I was when I was just a 14-year-old kid with a tape recorder screaming in my bedroom. But it's basically pursuing a lot of the same themes and ideas and feelings. And there's also the saying that an artist is in love with a specific feeling, a specific mood, and I think there's also some truth to that.
Yeah, because I guess this is only really stuff that you can acknowledge within yourself or begin to understand from these kind of bird's eye perspective moments where you're compiling all this. These
I don't enjoy looking at listening to my old music. I don't really. I have a very low sense of nostalgia. I keep all this stuff, and I want to have it available because it's me. It's what I've done. But I don't really. I don't have a great need to sit and listen to these things. But I've done it, and I've done it publicly. So I should at least control, in some sense, how that material is being presented and being kept available.
I think it's interesting you mention the lack of nostalgia you feel over your own sounds. I mean, I want to now move on to the records that you've picked for Crucial Listening, but before I'll ask you to put forward the name of your first suggestion. I mean, we've had some discussions, you and I, about how to approach this selection of the 3 records, and I think the subject of what important signifies has been a quite crucial part of that. And I know that you may have had some thoughts about some records where perhaps they were on first glance perceived to be significant to you, but maybe on closer reflection don't have that present tense pertinence that these other records do.
I found that a number of the things that were important to me, I've either outgrown them, or I've grown away from them. It's not like that I've I think they're crap. It's just that things serve their purpose, and then you move on to other things. And I found that very few of those crucial albums, important albums for me, have stayed with me. There's so few of them that stayed with me. And I also think that I heard things backwardsly, because I started making experimental music without really having heard experimental music. I started out as this kid in the north who had this idea that I could just explore sound, and then I came to the realization later, being informed by other people, that there's actually a long history of this music. So I discovered things, and then I found that other people have been doing it for a long time, and so I heard things in the wrong in the wrong order, I guess.
That's interesting. I imagine, though, it was probably quite probably had quite a profound influence on a lot of the decisions you made. I mean, do you think you would have perhaps gone a different route had you already been aware that some people had been paving a similar path? Maybe would you have had more thoughts around, am I infringing on what's already been created? Or
yeah, that might be. Might be that I would have become more. How do you say, self-aware, and maybe it would have been a hinder for me. But it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. But because I was just by myself doing this music, and nobody was there to guide me or inform me, and I would just grab whatever small pieces of information I could get. This was before the internet. I guess because of that, I just learned to do stuff and just not really be too afraid about how it's perceived or how people think about it. And so I still have this lucky ability to just go ahead and do things on my own. I don't really need to sit around to get being acknowledged or this. I just do things.
Nice. So let's turn to your first of the three albums that you've selected. You can pick them in any order you please.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to go for first?
Well, let's go for the one that may be surprising, but it's Pink Floyd with Meddle, the 1971 album. And this is an album that has stayed with me since I've heard it. It's been important. I've liked it since the first day I first heard it. But I don't remember when I heard it. But I knew I was probably before my teenage years, and it was very typical for kids who were interested in music here to fall in love with Pink Floyd. It's how to say, it was just part of the education. It was part of the musical education. These were albums that your parents had in their record collection, and Dark Side of the Moon, of course, is famous. But Meddle was the one that I connected to the most.
Any idea why you chose Meddle over the other potential choices you could have gone for here?
Well, yes. I think it's two songs that makes me go for that. It's the opening track, which is One of These Days, and then it's Echoes, of course, the side B. The track, the monumental 23 minutes track. And I think this was the first time that I heard a side-long track, that a piece of music could fill an entire side of an LP. was mind-blowing when I first heard it. It just went weird places, and it took its time. It didn't, it doesn't hurry on, it doesn't follow the short 4 minutes song structure. It's not in a hurry, and it's long and experimental. It has weird sounds, and and effects, and it's kind of like a trip. And when I was a young kid, that made a huge impression on me. That B-side, Echoes.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what can happen when the duration is able to reach this extent, particularly within the context, I think, of music which has a basis in songwriting. I mean, this piece has the time available, or makes the time available rather, to deviate so far from its center and then comes back to itself in the final stages, and there's that recurrence of, I guess, the more song-centric element of the track at the end, once you've sort of been stumbling through this weirdness of this wilderness of weird sounds.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it hits you again that you're kind of back where you were 10 minutes ago. That's pretty startling to listen to, I think, even now.
Yeah, I still like that. I still like music that takes you for a ride. I like that it goes out into this weird place, and then it comes back, and it doesn't really come back to exactly the same spot, but it comes back to song form, and this fascinated me as a kid, and it's kind of a big mystery, the song, to me. Still, I'm now much more able to analyze it, and I realize, and I saw David Gilmour say this, that it's basically a dialogue between the guitar and the keyboards, but it's still sort of it has something mysterious to it. There's something big and grand, and I think I like that. I think that I like that in music. I like music that has this feeling of something huge, this cosmic thing. All that stuff I liked, and maybe it connects to my environment. These these mountains and this harsh climate and so. I don't know. I like it.
Yeah, I'm just doing some research as well prior to speaking to you. I mean, it's one of these records that seems to have such a great wealth of fascinating information around the particulars of how the record was made.
Yeah.
And it's one of these albums seemingly where you can isolate a particular instrument and you can bet that there's an interesting anecdote as to why the instrument sounded the way it did, or why the idea came into fruition, either through serendipity or some moment of crazed genius,
Well, they were experimenting with multi-tracks in a way that was quite adventurous of its time, and for me, this album is their masterpiece. I know a lot of people like Dark Side of the Moon, but I think Dark Side of the Moon is too. I think it's too clever. It's too designed in a way, and I also think at Dark Side of the Moon, Roger Waters started to think that he was a good lyric writer, which I disagree with. And I'm one of those people who doesn't like The Wall a lot, because I think Roger Waters, his ideas of lyrics, I think to have meaning, and he's obsessed with the war and social injustice and all that, and that's fine. But I don't think this. I don't really like it. I like that in the early days of Pink Floyd, the lyrics were just images. They just like poetry that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have to have a clear meaning behind them. And I think after that, when Roger Waters took over the band, they got sidetracked. And I actually prefer the Pink Floyd after that, the one that everybody seems to hate. But I think they just went for big. They just went huge, visceral, this light excess and lasers and too many musicians and all that. I actually appreciate that more than the important Pink Floyd that has something to tell you. But I think at Metal that was perfect. It was the perfect balance of everything. I could have taken their second album, which is Source for All Secrets. I think that's also a kind of a masterpiece. But Metal has echoes, and that's what makes it the best one for me. But I think it is a flawed album. There's this track at the end of side A, which is called Seamus, which is a blues with a dog, and that's obviously a filler. That's obviously not a very good decision to include that. It's funny, but it's funny 2-3 times. It's not something that you like. Oh, that was really smart to put there. But I also, because such a strong album has imperfect moments of not the best judgment. That also makes it better for me, because there's a human element to it, and having something too perfect and too neat is not good either. It should be some loose ends and some stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I also think that the football song that you Never Walk Alone, it's a bit awkward.
Yeah.
Every time it comes, it's like, whoa. You feel people holding hands at the football match in England in 1971, and it's kind of beautiful, but it's also kind of kind of kitschy and going for a cheap shot. I don't know. It's so these things intrigue me also. That there's stuff on the album that I don't really like so much, or I can't really justify. But that's also the beauty and I think that's the thing that I came away from from metal. It's that the album as an art form, and the album being more than this, just a bunch of songs put together. And I know historically, Sgt. Pepper was the first album to make that significance, to make the album an art form, or Pet Sounds, or all these 60s things. But I heard them later, and metal was the one that I heard that I realized, wow, the album is just this magic place where you can do things.
Which is interesting, because it sounds to me like this was a bit of a anomaly in terms of how Pink Floyd were working, in terms of they didn't have a solid concept for what they wanted this record to be.
No, it's not a concept album. Dark Side of the Moon and the albums to follow were more concept albums that had like a red thread that goes through it. And this is weird bits and pieces that they thought fitted together. So I like that. And it's also the opening track, which One of These Days, which I think had a huge influence on me for my live performances. When I talked about how I like to build, and you come to this sort of ecstatic, huge sonic climax, and that song really is that in 5 minutes. Of course, it's different instrumentation, and it goes into this big thing with the slide guitar, and it's sort of like a blues in a way, I guess. I don't really know, but I've come to realize that many times I'm sort of playing a version of One of These Days when I do my solo performances. I think that in the back of my mind, I'm still that 11-year-old hearing this album, and made some impression on me. I've never said that publicly, but there you go. I think it certainly had an influence on me.
I guess that's one of those things which is audible to you, but no one else. I mean, I can't imagine people sat in the crowd in your audiences going, "Shit, that's One of These Days by Pink Floyd."
Exactly, but that's how it is with when you're working creatively. You get influenced and informed by things that nobody would pick up on. Absolutely nobody. And I had this phase about 5-6 years ago where I was obsessed with Italian prog music. And I made this album, which is a noise album, but in my mind it was completely informed by Italian prog music. But you couldn't tell. But for me, that was crucial. And I've also in the later years I've started producing other artists, and I've come to realize it's the same with them. And we would talk about influences and things that they were interested in, and it would inform the music, but the music wouldn't sound anything like it.
Yeah, which is why I find these kind of conversations so fascinating. You get a tiny glimpse at what it's like to be situated on the other side of the musical experience, because these are just things that I guess are so rooted in personal experience and so deeply rooted that there's no way that a listener without some very, very great deal of intimacy with the artist in question would be able to pick up on these things. But then again, I guess these are the kind of things that later inform listening experiences. You know, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go and re-listen to Lasse's music and think about it in context of that potential Pink Floyd influence, which may or may not be fruitful, you know.
Well, I guess, but our minds are made in such a way that we're constantly searching for connections. We're constantly trying to connect pieces in our mind. That's how our mind is. We just, so if you sat down now and said, "Oh, it sounds like echoes of like Pink Floyd," you would hear the you would probably hear the experience, the connections. But I could have lied and told you that I was very influenced by Roxy Music and the first albums, which I now love. I heard them when I was an adult, but I could tell you that, and you could probably make that connection too. But I think we should move on to the next album, which is probably a more direct, easier to hear influence on our music, which is Ground Zero. And there's an album called Revolutionary Pekingese Opera, version 1.28 from 1995. And this is an album that had a huge influence on me. And it's Otomo Yoshihide's band, and I heard it when it came out, and it just opened the whole world for me. It was one of those how do you say, gateway albums.
Yeah. Where did that gateway lead you?
Well, it was crucial in a project that I had called Jazzkammer, which is something that went on from, I think, 1997. It was a duo with me and a guy called Jon Hegre, and he was in Bergen and I was in Trondheim, and I met him when I played a solo show there, and we connected to our love of this Ground Zero album, and I think it informed our music in many ways that you could probably actually hear as well.
Yeah, in fact, Onyas came out. I actually heard that band way back when I was first inducting myself into I guess more extreme or louder forms of music. I think someone put me on to, is it called Metal Music Machine? It blew my head off in the best way. So I guess I should thank you for that as well. But
you're referring to the Jazzkammer album?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were talking about the Lou Reed.
Oh no, no.
You know, there was some journalist who told Lou Reed that people in Norway had taken his title and mixed around the words.
What did he make of that?
He really wanted to hear it. So the label Small Town Supersound, got these calls from his manager requesting a copy of the album.
Whoa!
But I never know what he made of it, if he ever heard it. But then again, the last thing that Lou Reed did was this metal album with Metallica. So maybe we had some influence on him. You know how things go around. But yeah. But okay, back to the Ground Zero album. Ground Zero was Otomo Yoshihide's big band, Japanese sort of all-star ensemble of musicians, and it's just a remarkable piece of work. It's so, you listen to it and it sounds like chaos.
Yeah.
But very finely designed, controlled chaos. There's things happening which you don't know if they're random or if they're very carefully composed and put together. And then you realize it's actually both. You know, there's the band playing. There's a lot of guest musicians who are sort of cut in there. There's also a lot of sampling, turntablism, and things just. It's just a wonderful album, and even though it's so special to me, every time I hear it, I hear something new. Every time I forgot about something that I pick up on. It's just like a garden of ideas that you go into, and it's amazing. I think and they made other albums by Ground Zero, and I think Consume Red is also a masterpiece. But I think this one is the main one for me.
Yeah, I'd heard Consume Red previously, and I really enjoy that album. But even that, I don't think prepared me for listening to Revolutionary Pekingese Opera. I listened to it yesterday and took a walk, and there were a lot of points where I was smiling and even chuckling at some of the things that were being thrown up. I mean, the moments where there's almost this prog rock eruption that's been hyper distorted with screams and feedback embedded within it are just insane. It's really mad.
It's really funny. You listen to it, and there's many moments of you just go. If you're with somebody, you just look at them and go. Which I think is a great quality in music if you can do that. And this album still does that to me. It's so fantastic. So much stuff going on, and I think. I mean, I gotten to know Otomo after this in the later years, and as I understand that this band was a huge big deal for him because he ended it in 1998, and he said to me, or he said in an interview, that he just sat on his sofa for 3 months reading anime and comic books. Manga comic books. He couldn't really do anything. And when he returned, he started making extremely minimal music, just clicks and hums.
Wow.
So I think in a way he burned himself out on that. And it seems from there on he seemed less concerned with being how do you say, being a recording musician. He seemed after Ground Zero, he seemed more concerned with live performance, composition for movies and also installation work. So I guess in a way this is his masterpiece as a recording artist, because it's such an intricate and detailed and rich work. And he's done things after which are incredible, but often they're more recordings of specific ideas or processes. They're not as carefully put together as this album is.
That's really interesting that he switched focuses after finishing with Ground Zero. I mean, there is definitely the sense, particularly with the fact that I can hear manipulation of tapes and vinyl, and obviously with the turntables and so much, it really does push to an extreme end of what's possible using recording apparatus. And that's amazing that maybe it wasn't long after that perhaps he went, right, that's done.
Yeah,
it's time to switch.
He couldn't top that. And I think the process it's not just him in a studio editing stuff, but it's also him being a band leader, and he was quite young at that time. And they did this live also; they could pull it off live. So I don't know. I asked him about it. He just go, I don't think he's also a person who doesn't really care about looking back. And now he's involved with politics. And he's very successful as a soundtrack composer and as a writer and as installation artist. So he's moved on, and I think he's an incredible artist. But I'm really glad he made this one in 1995, because it had huge influence on me. It still does. I still love this album.
And you've collaborated with him yourself. I was listening to Super Single, which I understand was recorded in Tokyo, and also I've seen videos of you guys performing live at the same venue, which sounded pretty immense. I mean, what's he like to collaborate with as a musician? How do you find that experience of performing live with Otomo?
Oh, he's one of those guys that he's so good that he'll lift you. Whatever you're doing, and you know, he's going to do something that, you know, he's not just playing ping pong, you know, but he's going to take something and reply and lift it up, and he's doing it with such musicality and sophistication that you don't realize that, you know, you just played with somebody who's like 10 times better than you. He's incredible. I think he's really an incredible musician. I have so much respect for him, and yeah, I've played with him over the years. It hasn't been an ongoing collaboration. It's more like we've met a few times over the years and done a few things. I think we first played in 2001, and then in Tokyo. But I'll tell you one thing is the Ground Zero album was recorded in a legendary studio called Gok Sound in Tokyo, and I made a recording with him in that specific studio about 5 years ago.
Wow.
Exactly, and I didn't realize until after we've done the recordings. It was me, Tomo, and Paul Nielsen Love, the drummer.
Yes.
And we recorded an hour and a half of music, so we were just sitting in the studio. It was in the evening, and we relaxed. We were just talking about stories, and then I realized this is the place where he made that album. This is the place where he did those Ground Zero album more than 20 years before, and it struck me. And but that's because I'm a nerd with a very bad memory, so I should have long before. You know,
Wow, that must have been amazing to be with the guy himself as well, recording in the same place where he did that. I mean, yeah, that must have been incredible.
Yeah, it was. But, you know, I almost missed it because my memory is so.
I think I don't know whether it was a review of some recordings or when you played live with Pal Nielsen Love, but to kind of bring it round in a strange kind of circle, I saw that someone said that you sounded like an extreme iteration of Pink Floyd or something like that.
Oh, there you go. I cannot hide my influence. I cannot hide my influences at all.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I've been influenced by many things, and when I grew up with metal music, because in the countryside in Norway, you either heard the pop music, which in the 80s was quite bad, or you would choose the metal gang. And for me, the metal seemed the more obvious, sonically interesting choice. But I was never really good at being a metalhead for some reason. So I didn't really feel all that, the comfortable with being a metal guy. But I enjoyed the music. But what I took most from metal music was the sonic aspect of very dense, distorted guitars and fast drums. And when I discovered I could make electronic music, that's what I wanted to emulate in a way. I wanted to make my own kind of metal music. So there would be a number of metal albums that were influential for me, but I hardly listen to them anymore, I have to say.
Was there an element of wanting to push beyond the extremity of metal? I mean, I know for me personally, my own journey into more experimental and louder music, I kind of pushed against what metal would give me in terms of an extreme experience. And then I think someone sent me something by White House or Hijo Kaiden or something like that. And then I was like, oh, there's something else. Was it like that for you?
I don't need the long hair and the spikes and all the posturing and the makeup. And I was close to the Norwegian black metal scene, and you know, they started to put on makeup, and for me, this is not for me. I appreciate what you're doing sonically, but the whole thing around it, I'm going to go over here and explore this. And I still enjoy metal, but I never felt like a proper metal dude.
So you've got one more album that you've...
Yes, and this is an album that I wish I heard when I was 13 years old, but I didn't. I heard it a bit later. And this is Tony Conrad and Faust, Outside the Dream Syndicate, which is for me probably the best album ever made in the recorded music. This is the one I would claim that this is the best. This is as good as recorded music gets.
Wow, what an accolade.
Well, you say something like that and it becomes a more interesting conversation.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and usually I say when people come visiting and if they haven't heard it, they go, "Oh, let's hear it." And then I put it on, and the first track is 25 minutes of just a violin drone and bass and drum going dum dum dum. And then the violin, but it's so beautiful. I think it's an absolutely beautiful piece of work. It's a masterpiece.
I love it as well. I'm so glad you included it on this selection, because any excuse for me to talk about Tony Conrad, but particularly with people who actually have a more intimate relationship with either his music or the man himself, is such a delight for me. But this record is unbelievable. I mean, I think what I really admire about an album like this is just the simplicity of the premise that drives it, and there's almost a real faith in that single idea, but also the ability to work within those confines into something that feels so liberating as a listening experience. I was going to say, is this therefore your favorite Tony Conrad record? But given that it's the best album of all time, by extension.
Well, there are days when I like four violins better. If you take four violins and you turn it up really loud, it's everything that metal music ever wanted to be. It's complete and absolute music. It's right there. It's just a wall of sound, and it's so rich and it's beautiful. But most days, Outside of the Dream Syndicate is my favorite ever album. and it's, I think now that Tony's gone, I think it's we need to study Tony Conrad and everything that he did in his lifetime. I think he's as much a smart guy to learn something from as, say, John Cage and his writings. And Tony wasn't as celebrated in his time as John Cage was. He never got the genius, but he was sort of rescued by the new generation of musicians in the 90s, like Jim O'Rourke and David Grubbs and Table of the Elements, and thank God for that. Thank God that he had his last 20 years with working with younger people and doing all the incredible things. And he has his history is there's so much. I mean, just now there came out 200 hours of him playing the piano.
I saw that.
It's like 200 hours. Tony Conrad on the piano, he recorded all that. There's so much. It's very hard to talk about Tony Conrad because he was such a genius, and there are other people who can say very smart things about what he did. And I'm just a fan, but I take great inspiration in his work, and I want to know more. I want to learn everything there is to learn about Tony Conrad because I think it's good for me. And I had the pleasure of meeting him a few times. And one of them last time was in 2012, and I interviewed him. for my magazine called Personal Best. And the interview was cut short because we were served dinner, and we didn't get to complete the interview. So I wanted to pick up later. I wanted to continue the interview on a later time because there was so much I wanted to ask him. But we never got to do it. And of course, in 2016, he passed away. So I finally realized, okay, that's what I have is this 50 minutes of us talking, and I have to transcribe it. So I did that a few months ago, and it's going to be in the next issue of Personal Best.
Oh, brilliant.
And in that interview, I asked him about Outside the Dream Syndicate, and of course it's been talked about before, but he had some interesting things to say about it, like how he wanted it to sound. He wanted the treble to be sharper, but he didn't mix it.
Right.
Yeah. He said it was mixed without his involvement. He always wanted to have a more sharper edge, which is weird because I think it sounds absolutely perfectly balanced. It's so beautiful. And he told me how the Faust guys, they were living in the countryside, in the Vume studios, and they would be at the mercy of the manager who had a car, but because they couldn't get anywhere. So they were there, and I think smoking dope and making music all the time. And Tony Conrad comes, and he's from a very different type of school, I guess you could say. But he just used them and just asked them to play this, and then he went on. And I think honestly, he probably wanted to make a proper solo recording, but he realized, okay, I have to do it with these German guys who invited me. So they sort of came with that, but I think it was a good coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, I read an essay that you wrote actually, Lasse, recently about Tony Conrad, which was really interesting to read, and mentioned your time spent with him when he came over to Oslo. What was it like to hang out with Tony as someone who's such a fan of his work, but also as someone who, I mean, I recently watched and put on a screening of the Tony Conrad documentary back when I lived in Bournemouth, and understood very quickly that I understood so little about him, and there were these facets of him which I didn't realize at all even existed. What was it like to be with Tony himself as a person?
He was a bundle of energy. He would run upstairs. Like there was a flight of stairs, he would run up them and then look at you like, "Why aren't you running?" And then he would say, "Oh, I have to go," because he was in Oslo for a week, and he'd say, "I have to go and talk to my students," and he would be on Skype, and you'd see all these kids in Buffalo, on watching him on a big screen, and he's talking to them. It's in the movie that he does that. So he would just constantly be doing things. He was always curious, he never played upon that he was a legend, and then Velvet Underground in New York and the Flickr and all of this stuff. He just wouldn't really. If you asked him, he would answer, but he wasn't interested in that. He was interested in what is happening now and what are we doing and so. I spent a whole day in Oslo going to music stores looking for the Norwegian Harding fiddle, which is a kind of a violin. But then it turned out that it takes 3 months to have one ordered. So,
oh my word!
But Tony wanted it now, but no shops could supply him with one. No, he's really funny, and there was a lot of stuff we talked about, which I'm really sad we didn't record because it would have been great for the interview. We had a long conversation about he actually liked Richard Wagner.
Wow.
I had no idea that Tony Conrad liked Wagner, but he was positive to Wagner. And we talked about the connection between death metal and Wagner. And I said that this is kind of similar music, aiming for similar expressions, and he agreed, and we would talk about things like this. So Tony was great fun.
You also mentioned about him playing live in Helsinki, and this performance involving a video of a calculator for 45 minutes in which he completely lost the crowd. Was that a show that you attended?
Yeah, that was a show I attended, and it was so great to see that he actually liked losing the crowd. He didn't mind that they hated him. He showed this. It's him crunching numbers on the calculator. It's just a shot of his hand. It's made in the late 70s, I think, or mid 70s on video. So it's not aesthetically beautiful, but and this I don't understand the relation to the numbers, but because I'm terrible at math, and Tony Conrad was a genius. But anyway, these like crunching numbers. He's repeating these numbers like that, and they showed that video, and it was a packed house with 400 people, I think, and they thought it was funny for 5 minutes, and then people just started hating it, and you felt these waves of now everybody hates it, and then it becomes funny again because it was just absurd, and then they realize it keeps going on and on and on, and so at the end of the screening, Tony gets up and he says, "Oh, I didn't realize they were going to screen the full version of it." And then he said, "Anybody who's got any questions?" And this Finnish guy gets up and says, "We hate you." and, and Tony, you could tell he loved it. It was a huge smile. He thought it was hilarious. So he didn't care if people were into what he was doing. He didn't care if he's way ahead of everybody else. He just, that didn't faze him. And then he got up and he did a solo violin performance, and all those 400 people that hated him started loving him immediately again, and they sat there transfixed for an hour as he played. So yeah, for me, Tony Conrad he was one of the greatest, and we're very lucky to be in this time, the same time as Tony Conrad, and I think we should learn from him.
Speaking of which, could you tell me a little bit about the project you used to have called Too Limited?
Yeah. Well, I had in the 1998 when these things started coming out again. You could actually hear Tony Conrad's music again. I had a friend who was equally fascinated, and we started a violin duo. We would just play one-stringed violins, just horrible scraping sounds, and we would meet every month in a location that we agreed on, and just explore the sonics of that space with our two one-stringed violins. And it sounded awful. It was really difficult. We made recordings. We did this for a full year every month, so it's 12 sessions. The last one was outdoors, and we were scraping our violins against the ice and the snow on the pavement. So that was completely us being obsessed with Tony Conrad. I don't think it sounded much like Tony Conrad at all, but it came out of our love for Tony Conrad.
This has been amazing, Lasse. Thank you so much for collating these records and for talking about them at length. I mean, one question I wanted to ask you, because it's something that I've been thinking about as I've been putting this question to other people, is how often you actually listen to these records. I mean, I know with the records that are particularly important to me, they almost transcend the desire for me. Transcend the need for me to listen to them that frequently, and yet their presence in my life as an artist and someone who thinks about sound is constant, and that doesn't change whether I listen to them or not. But how often do you listen to these three albums?
Good question. I would say with the Tony Conrad and Faust, about every 3 months I would listen to it. The Pink Floyd, maybe a couple of times a year. One or two times a year, but the Ground Zero has it. I realized that it's been a few years since I heard it, but when I put it on, I realized I still love it. And that's not always the case with these albums that you wait 2-3 years and you listen to again. Sometimes you come back to music and you go, I've had this thing now with a lot of the albums of the last half of the 80s. When I've come back to revisit them, I really don't like their production values.
Right.
They're like Swans and Neubauten. They have this gated reverb thing going on, which I now find extremely annoying. And that's because I've started mixing and I'm now working with drum sound, and now I can't listen to these albums. You see through them, and this is the problem. But it's not a problem with these three.
Yeah, there's certainly no, as far as I can tell, gated reverb on that drum sound on the Conrad Faust thing.
No, that's the perfect drum sound. Right? That is perfect. And I also think with Pink Floyd, I think Nick Mason, you ask drummers, and a lot of drummers don't like him because he has sort of an understated way of playing that I think came out of jazz music, and people say, oh, it should have been like a John Bonham type drummer, and I think it would have been wrong. I don't think he gets enough credit as a drummer.
I guess that's the issue with understatement, isn't it? People don't so readily feel, oh wow, what's going on here? Because I guess so much of that is to do with what they could be doing otherwise, and the absence of particular actions. Same
with the Beatles, and they're the biggest pop band in the world, and people still say that Ringo Starr was not a good drummer. Of course, there's a few number of us who thinks he's kind of the perfect drummer because he played on Sgt. Pepper, and how could that album be any better in any way? It's impossible. So there's something about perfection, and there's something about what is right. So Dark Side of the Moon is a perfect album, but Metal it's a perfect, So, and I think that's something that's I think is often overlooked, especially in these times where you could sit in your tiny studio and make the perfect album because of the tools we have available now. So I think it's important to leave in some traces that this was made by humans and not strive for something perfect, because life is not perfect. Nothing is perfect. So I don't think it should be in art either. Perfection is a dead end. Don't pursue it.
I won't. Excellent advice. There was one final question I wanted to put to you, Lasse, because I think, speaking of the current climate, I think we've now got such an array of possibilities in terms of listening to music, and obviously they all have their utilities, but for me personally, I think I found it important to retain at least one method of listening to music which I know can facilitate deep listening and a real rich appreciation for the music that I like. So do you have an environment or a setup or anything like that you use as a means to really listen to records, or are there multitude?
Yes. Well, I have actually my really good stereo is now in a storage space in Oslo, because we still own an apartment down there and we still intend to go back. But so I actually don't have my vinyl collection with me. But I have decent monitors here because I work with sound. Also, I have a home studio. And I do take time to listen to music. I think it's important, and it's strange now that music is available everywhere. It's so easily you could stream all kinds of music at the touch of a button from your phone. But still, music as a thing has become devaluated. It's lost a lot of what made it important before. And I think that's been taken up by other things. I think we're now living in a time which is very busy, very saturated, very dense, and everybody is expressing themselves on social media. So I think some of that has taken up what used to be the function of music. And I think that's kind of sad. I think this is a time it's not really good for music, even though a lot of great music is being made. But I think music isn't really being valued in the way it should be. And I'm not talking about financial thing, because that's what the artist will see that first, saying, "Oh, people are not paying for music anymore." Well, that's not really the big problem. The big problem is that people don't really care about music in the same way anymore. So I think it's an interesting time, and I don't know where we are going. But for me, privately, I listen to music, and I take great pleasure, and I take time to sit down every day to listen to one album properly, no matter how busy I am.
That's great. And I think that's been a key to me feeling very grounded as a listener, but also just in my day-to-day, is taking regular time to just make music a primary dedication for at least a certain stretch of time.
We have to make music important again. We have to take time to, for people like us who obviously love music, we have to take out time, and we need to express that, I think. And I think you making this website and what you do with these interviews, I think it's actually really important. And it's not as much about nostalgia as it is about trying to examine why this stuff meant so much for us. And maybe if music, maybe something else came and took music's place that would be as valuable as music. That's great, but I think the value of music has been taken up by other things, which is not as good, and which is also something that we're kind of being controlled by. We have all these algorithms, and it's kind of a bad time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a depressive and downbeat ending? I'm sorry if it felt like that.
It went up to a point where we were speaking of the value of music, and now we're speaking at the death of concentration at the hands of technology.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd like people to have that sense of stomach sickness as they stop listening to this and carry that with them. But
yeah, but I think music can again be important for people. I just think we need to be better about how we present it. I think a lot of us became lazy. I think especially in my field of experimental music in the 2000s, it became so easy to manufacture CDs and make CDRs and post stuff on SoundCloud or MySpace or what was before that. And I think that people kind of forgot the importance of the music. They got caught up in that they could just do a lot. And maybe I was one of them. I've certainly been a very prolific artist, but I'm trying to focus on what is important about this. And I take great pleasure in still making music and enjoying music.
And you make so much of it. I mean, I have to say, Googling your name against, say, Tony Conrad and Otomo, and pulling up so much information about past collaborations and about things you've said about them, I have to confess I did Google Lasse Marhaug and Pink Floyd just to see whether there may have been some underground basement show, perhaps, that I'd overlooked. I wouldn't put it past you, but thank you, Lasse, so much. If people want to check out more of your music or thoughts, or I know you work in various different fields, including design as well and photography, but where should they be headed?
I don't know. Maybe.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Don't
listen to Tony Conrad instead. Don't listen to me.
Fantastic. And on that note, Lasse, thank you. And to everyone listening, I will speak to you soon.